And now it is indeed time for our first panel. The topic is dealing with security challenges from the digital space, and the moderator is Erkanda Bujari, a media development professional, and she will now join me on stage and take over. Yes, please. Yes.
Oh, it's done from there. I'll invite also our panelists, at the same. Oops, sorry. Our panelists can come up to the stage. Oleg. One of our panelists, actually, Agnieszka Maria. She'll be joining us from video, right? Aymen. Nice meeting you. I met with some of you before. So we have some distinguished panelists here today to talk about the situation of digital risks affecting the work of journalists. And we have Agnieszka already online. They will unpack the situation for you. What are the risks out there? Who are the actors, these nefarious actors, and what are the most virulent, risks that affect the work of journalists and media organizations. And the focus will be on how do we use solutions? What are the best solutions out there? Who are providing these solutions? How should the media development organizations change their strategies to keep up? Because, with AI and technology going so fast, these attacks are becoming more sophisticated and really affecting the work of journalists and media organizations. So without me talking much, because we want to hear from our guests, I'll start introducing our guests here. You have a short bio in the materials of the conference. Just so that we know, Agnieszka Maria Walorska. She's based in Berlin. She's a tech entrepreneur and founder of many startups with a focus on AI, deepfake, the interaction of humans and machine. Oh no, we got.
That's just me. That's just me. I'm just demonstrating.
Oh, okay. Yes. She also has a podcast. The English name of the podcast, Agnieszka, is Back to the Future, I think, something like that, where she discusses the societal impact on organizations, and society of AI and the emerging technologies. She's a writer, a lecturer on AI and how it impacts business and society. So that will be her focus and area of expertise in the digital, safety subject. Our next panelist is Dr. Christopher Nehring, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. He's a fellow of the media. He's a fellow of the media. Media program in Southeast Europe for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. He's based in Sofia. He lectures at the University of Journalism and Mass Communications in Sofia. His area of expertise is very interesting: intelligence and media organizations, in addition to misinformation, disinformation, actually, and security and safety in Eastern Europe. His focus is in the area of, where I work now geographically. Next panelist is Aymen Zaghdoudi. He is based in Tunisia. He is senior policy counsel base for Access Now. Before that, he worked for Article 19 as a legal counsel. And his area of expertise is in media freedom, how digital developments are affecting media freedom, the work of journalists. And he also teaches at the University of Tunisia let me give the exact name, Institute of Press and Information Sciences, where he teaches media law and constitutional law. I love media law people. Next panelist is Oleg. Oleg Khomenok. He's a media trainer and consultant. He has 27 years. Originally from Ukraine. He now, I think, is based in Turkey. He does wonderful work, in investigative journalism, media support, PR, has developed many manuals on these topics. He serves on the board of directors of Global Investigative Journalist Network. He's an expert of International Fact-Checking Network and a member of the Commission on Journalistic Ethics. He will treat the subject from the perspective of, how digital attacks affect the work of journalists. So without much ado, let's start to unpack the topic for our audience. What are the digital attacks that are affecting the work of journalists right now? What are the most virulent? Who are the actors? Are authoritarian governments particularly, part of these nefarious actors? Is there gender? And we heard Elisa talking about how women journalists are worst affected by online threats and harassment. Is there a gender, aspect to this? And how can we get prepared for all these attacks? So anyone who wants to take up the stage, and start talking is welcome. Agnieszka, maybe? So,
sure.
Yeah, I think you should start laying the ground for the discussion.
Sure. Obviously, I will start from my specific perspective. I'm not a journalist, although I have been almost 20 years ago. So that's where I come from initially. But in the past years, I dedicated myself to the topics of disinformation, especially in the context of generative AI. And as you know, in the past years, this area sped up quite a lot, as we could see. So I'm not an expert on cybersecurity, but obviously the deepfakes have very different possible influences on the work of journalists, both from the security perspective, but also from the fact-checking perspective. And I think one of the aspects that we probably don't discuss enough is social engineering, using deepfake for social engineering. And I mean, you just saw from what I was basically showing very, very, very quickly with my fake camera. Obviously, you wouldn't take me based on this image for a real Olaf Scholz, yeah, because that's the cheapest fake that you can possibly imagine. It's basically just a free tool where I can upload an image, and then it's trying to mimic a little bit my movements and my way of speaking, my mimics, and so on. But this is basically done without any technology. So when you think about using this technology in a more sophisticated way, using also audio deepfakes, then it's very, very easy to get potentially some private information from the people and so on. So, I mean, we saw with the Pegasus scandal, for example, how journalists have been targeted, and with deepfakes, this kind of targeting for the purpose of threatening and other purposes got much easier, and we really have to be vigilant about these aspects. So maybe just this perspective as a start into the discussion.
Yeah. Well, I would. just don't want to cut short. Well, I would like to point out 3 things, just to keep it going and to start with, and all of them were mentioned already in the 2 keynotes. Just 3 aspects I'd like to point out when we're talking about digital safety, and leaning from my perspective a bit about how secret intelligence services come into play here. The first aspect, secrecy. Second one, public-private partnership or privatization. And the third one, let's call it information warfare. Regarding the first secrecy, we heard that during the first keynote, that secrecy is one of the main reasons why journalists are being targeted with sort of the spy software. It is also one of the reasons why governments use intelligence agencies for that purpose, because secrecy is the modus operandi of these organizations. So they're trying to hide what they're actually doing. For that purpose as well, and that is a big trend we can monitor during the past 20 years or so with the whole cyber sector, that there are completely new forms of public-private partnerships forming. Agnieszka already mentioned the big example of Pegasus software. One of the most striking aspects of this software that was used all around the world to target journalists is how a medium-sized Israeli cyber security company supplied a major technology tool to all intelligence services around the world. And how, from North America to the South Pacific, everybody relied on that tool. It was cutting edge and serving the purposes, and they obviously, filled a huge gap in the market. And that is just one example we know about. There are several more. And that is something that has changed during the past 20 years compared, for example, to the Cold War period 40, 50 years ago, when all this the surveillance work was still done in-house by government agencies. And now part of it is outsourced. There's also a larger number of people and companies participating in it and profiting from it. The third part that was stressed out numerous times during the second keynote is that not only when it comes to this to security issues concerned with journalists, it's not only about surveillance or control of journalists. It's information warfare that is happening against individuals from the journalistic world. Also something where we can see like a copy and paste from the political disinformation industry, that some people are being singled out and then attacked by troll armies, which are again at least partly controlled by private companies working for governments. There were a couple of cases during the past months where I've been approached by investigative journalists who were investigating the cooperation between some authoritarian governments in the world with leading PR companies in Europe, North America, creating disinformation campaigns against journalists. So these were 3 points I'd like to throw out there. Yeah.
Good. So how is the MENA region
Yeah,
handling?
I'm going to try to combine between the global threats, but also some threats which are specific to the MENA region. And I have identified 5 threats. So obviously surveillance, smear campaign, hate speech, especially when it comes to women journalists. And that's the new trend now in the MENA region. It's the cybercrimes legislation that they've been used to target journalists. And also when it comes to social media companies, they have also a part of the responsibility. Yeah? Yeah. So when it comes to doxing or smear campaign or hate speech against women journalists, I've seen that many Facebook pages, for example, they've been publishing a lot of content to target journalists, And as I said, when it comes to women journalists, then the angle it's a bit specific. So they target women journalists through the angle of honor, for example, or because of their sexual freedoms, or because, I don't know, drinking alcohol or going out. So they try to share this content with the aim to harm their credibility. The second, it's surveillance. Yeah. Of course, Pegasus. And here also it's concerning that last week, that with the European Media Freedom Act, in the Article 4, now surveillance in Europe, even it's legalized. And we're going to speak about it maybe later in the workshop on surveillance to explain how this Article 4 from the European Media Freedom Act is against not only the international standards related to freedom of expression, but also against the Global Charter of Journalistic Ethics. And among tactics that they've been used by the government in the MENA region, so sometimes they target the devices even before they are sold. So you buy the device, but it's already infected. Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to cybercrimes, so at the moment there are ongoing discussion at the UN level regarding a cybercrime treaty, and I think it's very important to follow this discussion and to see how some states are trying to influence the content and the scope of the cybercrime treaty. So instead of focusing only on cyber-dependent crimes, they are trying to add like cyber-dependent crime or like content-based offenses. And so Access Now will publish next month a policy brief on the cybercrime legislation in the MENA region, where we find that the majority of the crimes are not related to cybercrimes, but rather related to content-based offenses like defamation, insulting the government, fake news, and with all of the vague terms, the broad terms that can be used by the judges to prosecute journalists. And also now there is a unified Arab strategy regarding digital content, and they're trying to legalize certain technique to target media work, for example, throttling internet, blocking website. They're also trying to oblige social media company to comply with the judgments, which is very concerning. And the last point, it's regarding the social media companies. I have a very, I think, relevant example when it comes to, for example, Facebook. So Facebook, they have what they call it the dangerous organization and individual policy. And recently, we discovered that when a reporter, for example, is using the term shaheed, which is in English we can say martyr. So when you use this term to describe, for example, a person who figures in the list of the DOI policy, the content is going to be removed without any explanation, based on the algorithm. And this also is very concerning because then it's going to impede also the journalistic work. These are the main digital threads that I can start the discussion and talking about it.
Right. Unfortunately, a lot of the governments are finding their way working with the digital platforms faster and using them to their advantage. If you're a media that criticizes the government, your content is blocked on Facebook, YouTube, and you don't even have a resource or recourse to go to these organizations or a contact, telling them, I'm a legitimate journalist here, I'm investigating this issue. And the government has these partnerships with some companies that for money, they have a better, a way to connect to platforms and block this under all excuses. Some of the excuses used in the Balkans is copyright issue. Under the guise of copyright, they're blocking content that criticizes governments. Oleg?
Not only governments, but does my mic work or not? Yeah, but just, Just speaking about the threats, I think that the software for the surveillance and just interrogation in the journalism work is getting more and more advanced. And like Pegasus is a zero-click software, you don't need to do anything in your phone, and you will be surveilled and tracked. And what happened with our colleague from Riga, from Medusa, whose phone had been attacked, and it's still unclear. It's about who is behind this, whether it was the government or there was the other government, or there was the government of Russia who ordered or requested from the other government, like Azerbaijan or some other countries, to do this kind of surveillance. And I like what Alice said about the silencing and self-censorship and the actually slap cases that are making people working like 80% of their working time just coping with the threats that they have. And the same might be with the digital threats. The reason is not only to keep silence or censor the journalists, but also to make them busy not to do their regular work. I think that there is also another issue that we have throughout the whole world, the lack of the legislative regulations of this kind of stuff. And and the impunity of the people who are actually interrogating and intimidating journalists using their digital security breaches. And as Alice said, that 20%, every fifth case of the online attack ends up with the physical attack. And these new technologies that are interrogating in the work of the journalists, they are enabled to track the geolocation of the person, the road of the person. So it helps the people to find and attack reporter. That's the problem of. And there is a lack of the collaboration between the journalism organizations, either within the countries, like in Ukraine, we had several cases of the issues with the digital security, like breaching the sites or just breaking the phones, and the community is barely reacting like unanimously, condemning this, and that's the problem that needs to be also resolved in a broad public discussion between the media, the human rights watchdogs, and the whole civil society, and the rest to the government to be solved in some way.
Thank you to all panelists. I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions, so I'm thinking that at the end we leave some time for questions, and we proceed with, talking about solutions, because that was the whole purpose of the panel, to look at solutions. What solutions are working? Can we catch up, with these developments in digital risks? A lot of these nefarious actors have unlimited resources, right? What organizations are providing these solutions? How can media organizations, particularly media development organizations, support journalists' work and stop this chilling effect the digital attacks have on journalist work? So maybe focusing on these solutions, the panelists can...
what came to my mind, like several years ago, I was part of the team who did the Yanukovych Leaks project. You might heard about this. And just looking at this set of the documents that revealed the whole corrupted scheme of capturing of the state, one of my colleagues said that the crime is organized and we are not. And that might be something that might be something that we need to discuss, how to organize ourselves. And just talking about what is needed or how to solve the problems, I made some notes for me. I think that we have good experience of Citizen Lab. This is the Canada-based organization that helps reporters in just solving some problems. Access Now is also doing a lot of stuff, investigating the cybersecurity attacks on the journalists and media. And these are the examples that shows how it's possible to do. And I think that what is important is to have a kind of chain of the hotlines and emergency support hotspots throughout the regions, like, for example, for the Eastern Europe or the Caucasus or the Central Asia. I'm talking about the region that I'm working on. There might be the network of supporting organizations, because I think that these organizations might share the technologies, might share the experience that they are gathering, working in different regions. It might help to create the common sense and common experience in coping this kind of stuff. And as well, we need a network of experts in digital security and actually to distribute this information throughout the media and watchdogs throughout the whole world, so they can. But initially, I think that we have the problem of the documenting and actually registering the cases of this kind of crimes or breaches. And I think that one of the tasks for the media and for the media watchdogs or media NGOs is to document and investigate the cases of the interrogation or just violation of the media and journalists' rights through the cybersecurity. I think that the investigation of these cases should be done not only by the media but also by the state, law enforcing agencies. Since that is what we need, the media CSOs might be advocating these kind of activities throughout the whole world and in particular countries. We need to think about developing of the counteracting technologies to be more proactive, not just responding on the threats, but collaborating with some high-tech companies in developing, in making them developing the counteracting, counter-surveillance software, like it happened actually with Apple. Apple created the system which is called lockdown, the mode for your iPhone that you can switch on to reduce the risk of being exposed or just interrogated. And actually, Apple started to send notification that your phone had been attacked. And that's a kind of example of collaboration between the technology producers and the media and actually the CSOs, the civil society. And that might be a kind of background for the collaboration with like Microsoft or Apple or whatever else organizations that have I believe that they might have some corporate responsibility values. Yeah.
But
So
Apple actually also created the backdoor that made Pegasus possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's always kind of the tough thing I believe with the tech companies with their different loyalties. So I'm not sure if I would, as a journalist, rely on ethical values of the tech corporation whose loyalty rather goes towards where the money is. To be honest.
Yeah, but it will be, actually it should be done together with the legal changes, the changes in the legislation that might ban the use the cybersecurity or cyber spying techniques against the media or against the journalists, and actually some real punishment for the developers who are doing the kind of spyware that is available for the governments or for the any other crooks that we have around us.
So it seems that, getting organized, civil society,
Yeah.
media organizations, media development organizations, and putting pressure on technology companies.
And whatever we are talking is about money. So to my mind, there is a need to create any kind of endowment or the foundation that would have money for the research, for the support, like the rapid response, and to fix the problems in case they are, and actually to provide money for the legal prosecution of the people who are doing something wrong with the reporters and the media.
Right. So maybe Aymen, you can talk about Access Now, how you're providing solutions to protect journalists against these attacks.
Yeah, so Oleg mentioned the Pegasus report, for example, on the journalist Galina. Also, more reports are to come soon, which is a bad news, of course, for journalism.
Right.
But that's the reality, unfortunately. So more reports to come regarding Pegasus infection of journalists, not only in the MENA region, but in other regions. And the problem that when it comes to surveillance, the impact is not only the chilling effect of surveillance among the journalists, but also its financial cost, because then also media journalists, they have to spend more money to protect themselves. And allow me, Elisa, to steal your sentence when you said government have to stop throwing their money before bed. Also, they have to stop throwing spyware services before bed, because selling spyware services to a government like Saudi Arabia or Algeria or Egypt, you have to expect that the victims will be also human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists. So it's very important to think about this. And at Access Now, we call government to implement a sort of moratorium on the use of spyware technology, export, sale, etc. And it's very important to create a sort of international framework when it comes to surveillance with sufficient safeguards, procedures, substantive safeguards. Also, on online platforms, it's still, even with the DSA in Europe, but it's still, there is a sort of problem in terms of transparency, how the recommender system is functioning and how it impacts the journalistic work, the media content on online platform. It's still foggy zone. We don't know a lot of things about this. And also when it comes to cybercrimes, so we try to plead or to advocate for the implementation of cybercrime legislation or cybercrime treaty, but only with a very restrictive scope, only on cybercrimes, not expanding the scope of cybercrime treaty to touch, for example, the journalistic work or the content work. So these are the main three recommendations on the use of surveillance to online platform and also on the cybercrime treaty.
Yeah, there is always risks with legislation because you end up with censorship. You don't want governments to regulate. So it's a fine line, you know, that we have to walk.
Yeah, there is a gray zone, actually.
Yes. There's pros and cons, you know, but that's why these conversations, these discussions, you know, and collaboration among civil society and journalist associations helps, you know, highlight what are the areas that we should focus on. Christopher, you wanted to chime in?
Well, yeah, regarding the regulation aspect of it, what has been around for already a couple of years, but is still not implemented, and probably we're not even close to implementing it, is a sort of a proliferation treaty of this particular kind of surveillance software, which, as you can see, you know, it's actually getting worse, not better, during the past decade. And looking at it more from an analytical point of view, you know, I'm rather pessimistic about it, because if you look at the trajectory from, let's say, Snowden to Pegasus or today, it's getting worse, and we still have not found the fix for digital surveillance yet, because probably the phenomenon is unfixable. There will always be more money to be made with attacks than defense. You have you could make the big companies, for example, make them pay for every security issue or backdoor that is being left in the software. You could make them contribute to a fund that is used to develop, you know, the countering software or IT security tools. But that still will not generate as much money as they can make with the offensive use of the software, and that has not changed during the past years. And with new AI technology, for example, the surveillance issue, not only for journalists or for in the security business, but for every employer, it's actually getting worse. So if you want really, the only safe thing against digital surveillance is not to communicate digitally, not even use a phone, which, as you know, as a journalist, is impossible. You cannot not communicate, and of course you can be surveilled at a in-person physical meeting. But for example, even for some of my research or press article, when I met or interviewed people from the intelligence business, you meet offline with your phones being stored somewhere else. This is what I tell you.
Even when it's turned off, it's still listening on you.
No, and because even if they have nothing to do with all the cyber spying business, they don't trust, and they say that there is no such thing as 100% cyber safety.
Yes.
You can make it harder by using certain apps or tools, but I don't think that we will reach that.
Yes.
But this, of course, creates the problem, and sometimes I think, if particularly with government employing this software, this is what they want, making it harder for you, because if you have to work 100% analog again, writing with your hand, in-person meetings, you're being slowed down. You're not as productive as you can be when using digital technologies. And I don't see there's not the one fix for that, or at least nobody has thought or implemented so far. It doesn't mean you can make it harder by using several tools, by not bringing your phone to certain meetings or something. But there's not like the one thing you can do to be safe from digital. From this
but
kind of
technology was supposed to make the work better, and has all these advantages to journalistic work and the whole society. But obviously some aspects of it are being used against. Agnieszka, do you want to say something related to solutions?
I think the most important solution is sorry, it will sound like a doomsday a little bit, but only the paranoid survive, And I can recommend, if you didn't read it, I can really recommend you the book about Putin's trolls on the front lines of Russia's information war against the world, because it shows you don't only have to be paranoid and really limit the usage of digital technology, especially if you are a reporter, a journalist that is touching issues like for example Russia or other regimes, but also you have to have a basically spotless life, because everything that happened in your past that might be used against you will be used against you. And with the generative AI that we have an additional problem, that even if you have been spotless and haven't done anything that could be used against you, it is possible to make it look that way. It is possible, for example, as a woman, to if there are pictures of you, then it's very easy to make porn with your face on it. It's possible to make a video showing you doing things that you have never done, and that's a new danger that's emerging. And I think the solutions and really is really being a little bit of paranoid, because from the perspective of technological solutions, there is a lot of discussion about the technological solutions, but every step in a technological development benefits both sides. So it's like with the cybersecurity, the same as in Gen AI, that basically that's a cat and mouse game. So that's the question: who is going to catch up earlier, the one who is hunting and the one who is being hunted? And on the discussion, on that we had before, the problem with the backdoors and with punishing actually companies for having backdoors, the companies would rather prefer not to have them. There's like a big, a long discussion, and it has a couple of years ago about Apple actually not wanting to agree to some of the backdoors, but more or less being pressed to do this by the secret services. And as long as the countries have particular interests in having backdoors for the purpose of, pursuing crime, terrorism, and so on, also these backdoors will always benefit both sides, because there's not like one backdoor that will just benefit the good guys. It will always benefit the bad guys as well.
Yeah, I would add another challenge that we have. That's what Agnieszka just made me to remind that we have the problem now not only in spyware, but the general so-called public security issues might also cause the problems for the journalists, like the security cameras on the streets with the face recognition system.
Yes.
If you even don't have the phone, if you don't have any tracking devices, you are just walking through the streets and your face is taken by the camera and it can be recognized. And in case the not only security services, but some crooks will get this information. Like we are living in the era of leaks, and not only Panama Papers, not only just Paradise Papers that leaked to the reporters, but the same leaks might be end up with some gangs or some criminal groups that might
the dark
use
web
this.
sells a lot of that.
Yeah, that's the problem, that even if we are not talking about the spyware, there are a lot of technologies that can make the reporter easy to be identified and located, and creates all these threats that are of physical attacks that we are talking about at the beginning.
So if there is no anything that panelists want to add, maybe we'll open the floor for questions. I'm sure there's a lot of questions on the minds of the audience here. Do we have a microphone going around, or?
Yeah, there are two.
Oh, somebody got up there. There is a hand here.
Thank you very much. My name is Timo from DW Academy, and I have a question for Aymen. Because you just said something very interesting. You said you're advocating for stronger cybercrime regulation, but not related to content moderation. And I'm just a bit like, what? Because, I mean, like hate speech, death threats are cybercrime. So how do you advocate for tougher cybercrime without going into content moderation? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Well, it's. I think we have to start by defining what we mean by cybercrimes. So cybercrimes, as a definition, it's crimes that target the informatic and computer system. So it has nothing to do with content, and content could be regulated based on other legislation. So, for example, when it comes to hate speech, or when it comes to defamation, or incitement to hatred, we already have, at the international level, we already have legal basis, which is, for example, the Article 19 from the Universal Pact on Civil and Political Rights, Article 20 also, that bans incitement to hatred, hate speech. So the question is, for what we are going to add another treaty at the international level while we already have, So that's why we are defending this position. We say, okay, it's important to tackle cybercrimes, but what we mean by cybercrimes, it's crimes that they target computer system, not like content, because content is already regulated, at the international level. I mentioned, for example, this pact, but also many other treaties related to child. So no need, for example, to add the sharing the sexual abuse material on child, while you already have international treaty that
Right.
ban such kind of content, you know. So the idea is that a lot of content that exists now in the draft of cybercrime treaty exists already in other international instruments. So that's the explanation.
Any other questions from the audience? We have.
Hi, hello. Thanks so much for a really interesting panel, and also thinking about what Elisa was saying earlier, is that I guess when we were having these conversations 10 years ago, then the focus was very much on how are we going to switch off the trolls. So what are we going to do to kind of get the, you know, to turn them off, to report them, and to involve the police and all that kind of thing. And I think that the question that we're all facing now is a different, slightly different question, is given the pervasive nature of these threats and of intimidation of different types, is what can we do to kind of switch off these people's voices in our heads, in other words. And so we've been talking later about kind of psychological safety and self-care, but given that you have to some extent painted a slightly bleak picture in the sense of the technology, how do we defeat the technology, it's going to be problematic, is what do you think that we need to think about as teams, as colleagues, in terms of creating a sense of safety within ourselves? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Anyone wants to take up the question?
On how to do that, I think what I can tell you every time
Information maybe and support.
Yeah, if that that depends on the extent on your personal character. You know what and this is sort of the sad part, but I think
Right.
Most of us working in the media business shares that. You know, I don't read commentaries, and I haven't for the past 10 years or so, because first of all, most of them are not written by humans. Second of all, you know, there's nothing there that I'm looking for. But I also stopped reading emails, you know, from random people reacting to my articles, which is sort of the sad thing, you know, because you know one in 100, let's say, you know, is actually somebody who is related to somebody you're mentioning in the article, or has actually something to share, which you're most probably going to miss. And of course, this is a big problem. So I wouldn't recommend that as a general strategy, also, because you sort of getting detached from your audience, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
But you know, it's something I personally employ. You know, I write my version out there and discuss it with the news desk, and that's it. Because all of the rest, you know, you would need to read like through 100 of emails just to find the one genuine one and the one that is worth responding or thinking about. But you know, I think also where you're getting at is psychological resilience against all this information war that is being launched, you know, on states, societies, and the individual. And I think regarding psychological resilience to disinformation, you know, on a societal or governmental level, there's been done a lot of, you know, progress during the past years. And you know, since I'm not doing that, I'm just guessing that some organizations are already working on that, breaking it down, you know, on the individual level, you know, how making the individual more resilient against these online attacks. But you know, I rather see, you know, again the same problem, that to become like 100% resilient against that, you're going to be detached from your social environment. And I think this is one of the challenges, how to bridge that gap.
That might sound like a joke, but we are stepping in a time when we will see or observe or participate in a fight between the good AI and bad AI. And I would rather leave this issue to the AI to make the monitoring of the all comments and defining which are produced, generated by the same AI, but on the other side, and make them to communicate with each other. That will just make our life much easier.
Well, thanks for advertising one of the workshops I'm having on AI. But that is something we can do in the short term. In the long term, this will lead, and this is one of the interesting questions when it comes to AI and political communication. Not only hate speech or disinformation, but political communication as such will become automated by artificial intelligence. So where will this lead us as a democratic society when most of the political communication is actually produced by AI?
Oh, yeah.
And this is only the one step, the communication, the passive messaging is produced by AI. Why not replace the politicians with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, and whether the
And live in a
AI will be
virtual
creator
world.
or co-creator or just the servant, and where the people are.
Yeah, I mean, if think it that way and just leave it to the AI, this is where you might end up. And so this is one of the inherent dangers of leaving, the automated review of hate speech or moderation of hate speech and all the information attacks to AI, because you will reach a stage where the human is entirely left out of that. It's produced by AI, controlled by AI, and maybe even read only by AI,
And regulated by AI.
and regulated by the AI. So this is a whole new situation. We haven't thought that through or have any idea what that might look like, but this is where we might end up.
And the AI will not be unified. There will be several AIs like the identities.
Right.
That's the problem.
It's like a new frontier, and who knows what it will bring in the future. Maybe Agnieszka, you wanted to add something, as your AI is your specialty, the risks coming from it. Can we mitigate the bad guys, bad AI, as opposed to the good AI? Is there such thing as good AI?
I mean, it's a such thing as a good knife. I mean,
Exactly.
you can use it for whatever purpose, yeah. And obviously, it's a little more complex than a simple tool. But I really don't like to speak about AI in terms of good or bad. But it's like there are nefarious use cases, and then there are like beneficial use cases. And I think we are right now in a very exciting time when we are trying to find out how to use it, like on both sides, how to regulate it, how to limit it, and especially when you go towards business models. But actually, the discussion, sorry about language models, but about the discussion like about the psychological safety and Christopher, the use case that you had, like not reading emails. This is actually something that. What you could use a number of AI tools already for to basically screen through the emails and then just say, okay, please just give me the ones like the positive ones, the affirming ones, or the or maybe the controversial ones, but not the ones with hate speech. I mean, you could do this obviously, and you might say that might be a good step for actually creating more of like psychological safety and still keeping you in touch with the people that you want to discuss the stuff, and cutting out all the other horse shit basically that you don't want to deal with. But I think the topic, I mean, you will have the workshop later on, and I think the topic of AI in this context is like really probably too complex to put it into like a 2-minute statement right now.
Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up? Maybe with some more positive, optimistic,
Yeah, hi, my name is Pariseka and I'm from India. My question is, we see that there are many news anchors generated by AI, and India has one. So do you think that there's a threat for journalists who are really doing the real work, especially the news anchor or the news journalist? Do you approve of AI-generated news anchors or news journalists?
I think Agnieszka probably will take this up.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to news, obviously you have quite a lot, and you have quite a lot of discussion and regulation, not just in the context of news creation, but for example, in the US, just recently in the context of also writers and actors. And I mean, this is I would say a different kind of threat that we have in many professions that are dealing with content creation. And you see this quite a lot, for example, as the first step in translation. So you have already whole like news groups and magazine that said, okay, we are ditching the whole group of people translating the news from English to Spanish because we do it all automatically. This is already like first kind of a threat right now, because when you see the translations, they are like 95% amazing. And then there are like a few percentage points where you have a lot of space for disinformation if there is no human in the loop. But I believe that there are, and I mean, that's maybe a very like kind of like utilitarian perspective for some types of news reporting, sports news, and so on. I believe that there will be much fewer human involved, and this is obviously a problem for the humans who will lose the job, but I don't believe that that's a big problem for the society, that this kind of news reporting will be automated. But when you go more towards different kinds of reporting, opinion pieces and so on, I would rather see it as a problem if we would give it all to language models. On the other hand, I believe that the language models can be a powerful tool in also improving writing, improving communications, making it more available to different groups. For example, through simplification of writing, through translation, and so on. So as always, for me, in most of cases, for me, there are always two perspectives to this, and I wouldn't say it's all bad, but obviously, it will have very big consequences for the job as a journalist.
Well, if I may, well, first of all, you should come to the workshop. Second of all, as Agnieszka already mentioned, there are several sides to it, and it's not that, I think it's inevitable. AI is going to be used in that, and it's going to produce and present information. It's already happening, and it has been happening for several years, we just didn't realize it. There are certain things I would suggest that AI should not be presenting and should not be doing in the information business. And also that, for example, when AI presents news, it should be clearly visible that it is, not a copy of a human, that it's not a deepfake human who's presenting some information, but that it is actually a program presenting information. You can make that visible with like an avatar and not like a human copy.
Not an impersonation, you mean, of...
There is, because, that there's been an incident with one of the German news anchors only a couple of weeks ago, where he appeared as a deepfake in a fraud scheme, advertising some sort of investment strategy. Why is a news anchor being used for that? Well, two reasons. The technical reasons, you have a lot of training material. The second reason is a high amount of public trust. News anchors, the people who bring you the news with the highest rates, let's say 8 o'clock news, being persons of public trust. And if you tamper with that, with an AI, like making copies of him, there are so many ways you can manipulate without inserting false information. For example, there's been trials by Xinhua in China producing an AI news anchor who would appear, in an outward. Her outward appearance can be customized to the viewer, which of course makes her more her or him or it or whatever, seem more credible, more trustworthy. You will more appreciate the outward appearance of this AI, making you trust the news, even if it's brought to you by the Communist Party directly. And this is just one little aspect you can tamper with, which of course is very different from having an avatar reading out the news in 10 different languages also. So it's going to be used. I think we should label it, and I also think it should be excluded from some parts of the information. And for more, let's talk later.
Right, during the workshop.
I agree, and I think that that's not only the problem how it will be presented, but actually who will set the agenda and who will set the sequence of the news and which news will be shown to the person, because that might be customized to the person based on the algorithm of the preferences or the habits of life and all this kind of stuff, and that will create these bubbles more strong, that information bubbles that we have now. When algorithm is deciding what to show us or not to show us, that's a kind of censorship that will be imposed by the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's shaping public opinion falsely.
Right, it opens the Pandora box for the manipulation.
Yes.
And indefinitely, there's no end to it. How this can, without even inserting false information into it, how that can manipulate the audience.
Right. So we're getting toward the end, and I wanted to wrap it up by maybe some optimistic perspectives to the issue, and have one brief comment from each panelist, what we should take with us, after this discussion.
Well, as we talked with Alice this morning, who is pessimist as well informed optimist.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think that the situation or the case that we are discussing it here right now, and we are understanding what is going on and how it might affect the whole system, is already good, and we are here to find the solutions, and I believe that it's possible to find the solutions with this amount of people who are quite patient and dedicated.
Yep. Aymen?
We are here talking about surveillance, safety of journalists, so at the end I can't forget about a journalist in Tunisia that recently has been put in jail, and he's going to serve for 5 years. Wow. His name is Khalifa Gesmi, and the reason the crime is that he published a trustworthy and verified news. So he published something about the success of a security unit to capture a terrorist group. Then they asked him from where he got the news. Oh. They obliged him to. He refused to disclose his, his source. Yeah. So they confiscate all his PC, phone, and then they could figure out who was the source. And now both the source and the journalist are in the prison for 5 years. Yeah. So I want to show some support to Khalifa Gesmi, and I hope that soon he will be released. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm struggling because it's, there's been some good wrap up,
but
the optimism.
Not so optimistic, but providing support is.
So it's just a suggestion. I mean, I think we the entire discussion went in that direction when we started out with digital threats and we're arriving automatically at the AI question. I think not only with regard to safety issues and security, but for the whole media system as such, you have to get engaged, with the technology, because it's inseparable, and it will be even more so in the age of AI. And to navigate it, not safely, because I think it's just impossible, but halfway safely, or better, just a bit better, which sometimes is a lot. You have to get involved with the technology and have at least a basic understanding of how to navigate the tools. Or something. So let's say a sort of digital literacy with these technologies is a prerequisite for every future journalist.
Right. There was a side event, I think, Reporters Without Borders and Deutsche Welle were providing, some information on how you protect yourself from this risk. Agnieszka, a wrap-up comment, a little bit of optimism.
Yeah, so be paranoid, but don't let it consume you. I mean, we shouldn't forget, I can always recommend the book by Hans Rosling, Factfulness. And I think we always, in the past tens and hundreds years, we're always discussing the threats of new technologies. And by objective standards, still our world got better and better in terms of life quality and so on. It's obviously tough to speak about the world getting better with everything that's happening, but I'm still trying to be an optimist and seeing a lot of positive forces that are moving us forward. And as Christopher just also said, look at the technology, use it. Don't just say, okay, this is going to be the end, or this is going to be doomed. I think there are a lot of positive aspects that we have to look forward to.
All right. I think I can extend a thank you to all our distinguished panelists for giving us so much information. For giving us so much information on the topic, which will help probably a lot of you to look more carefully at the workshops afterwards and, and decide which one you'd like to attend. Aya, we can get off.
You can. So thank you.